Max Weber.
Yeah, Max Weber.
I think we say Weber because he's German.
Yeah.
It's not Weber.
And the reason we're talking about Max Weber is because
Phails at philosophy.
she opens with this comment Weber makes, because Weber is one of the major early voices in sociology of religion, right? He's a sociologist. He's an economist.
Sociology.
And sociologist. And he studies the problem of evil as a social fact. And I think part of what we might want to talk about is there's the problem of evil as a social fact and the problem of evil as kind of a theological, philosophical problem. Right?
Yeah.
And for Weber, they're tied together because Weber does investigate really how we engage with social systems through our rationality. That's part of what he's trying to understand. Is how does rationality develop as a social fact? That's where we get to the notion of bureaucratization, right? Because bureaucratization is part of how we embody rationalization in our social interactions.
Yeah.
Right? We create these systems which are reasonable to manage our interactions, and then we increasingly codify them. And so reason is a codifying and ordering of our social world for Weber.
I watched videos on Weber, and what I noticed, it seemed like the videos all highlighted this one contribution,
right?
Which
he's
was
most famous for,
which is your success or failure, which is great for this show. Phil Phails, talking about failure and success. Your success and failure is based on whether or not you worked hard.
Right.
And if you worked hard, they almost tied that to religion because they used like this Protestant, was it Protestant?
Yeah. So his most famous argument is laid out in the Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. Right. Keep in mind, he's not arguing for this idea. He's arguing that this idea is what allows capitalism to develop out of mercantilism. So there's a basic problem to make the move from a mercantile economic system to a capitalist economic system, right? You have to have an ideology, and this is a system in which what I value is wealth to a system of what I value as capital.
Because he talks about traditionalism, like traditional was the beginning, like think of you make a bunch of bespoke handmade bowls versus industrialization where you have a machine that makes a bunch of bowls that are exactly the same. Is that mercantilism is kind of
not exactly
traditionalism?
Right. So you'll need the groundwork of capitalism because he's really studying a phase of transition that's earlier than that. He's looking at the Dutch traders and the way they develop the joint stock company. So how do we get to a point where you, as someone who has wealth, you give up participating in that wealth to generate capital, to have more capital. So we've got to have a theory of value in which, all right, let me just think in terms of like a traditional like stereotype of a Renaissance trader, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a Renaissance trader is someone who has some ships and has a lot of beautiful art and has a lot of beautiful wealth. And I, as a merchant, why do I do that? I do that to get wealth, to have a really nice house, to have really beautiful art, to have great food. That's wealth. Wealth is the goods we get, right? Capital, right? And capital is just pure finance, money.
Yeah, it's
right?
money.
I focus on capital, but I'm not focused on capital to generate capital. I'm focusing on capital to generate wealth. To shift into capitalism, you have to shift my focus away from away from wealth to capital, where now I'm not seeking a nice car, a nice house, all those things. I'm seeking a fat bank account, right?
This is why I saw this example of he did 2 lemonade stands, and each lemonade jar costs $1.
Right.
And you sell all 3, And so what do? You sell each one for $2, and
Right.
so you have $6. Do you buy 6 lemonade jars and sell those, or do you buy 3 more and then buy candy with the other $3? So what I take back from what you're saying is using all 6 of those dollars as capital to reinvest,
Right.
to then generate more, is this idea of you're not enriching your life on the first
Right.
sale. You're not buying the candy.
Right.
You're reinvesting, because that money is not wealth, it's capital.
Right, exactly. And so, capitalism to work requires a kind of like, it's somewhat nonsense, right? Because it somewhat requires us to give up the benefits of capital to focus on generating capital. That's why someone like Warren Buffett is like the capitalist hero, because he just has lots of cash, but he lives in a small apartment.
He's like modest. And,
Right,
yeah.
exactly.
I don't think it's an apartment, but yeah.
Right, it's just like, but the way that like the myth around him is constructed is
Right,
that
he drives like a regular car, and he doesn't take a
Exactly.
bunch of vacations.
but he's got such a fat bank account, so he is success, right? That's kind of stupid, right? If you think about it, like if you're going to generate a lot of capital,
We're starting beef with a very wealthy man now, Grant. Hey, look, I just want to make sure
No.
you're out there. Grant said that about you,
well, and I'm not saying that
Warren Buffett. I
he's stupid. I'm saying
would take your support on the show and do whatever you want me to do to Grant Potts.
I'm saying the ideology, the like framework is kind of nonsense, right? Because it's
Yeah.
it's about
You
like
generate to live a better life.
Exactly.
To have like, and not an extremely like, not. We see in the world a bunch of people who have just, I think, way crazy wealth.
right,
Like there's some level of wealth that I think is reasonable. And then there's another level that's like, man, that's
Right.
No, I
Right.
don't think that that's what we should be doing.
Yeah.
But definitely championing this, like, don't use any of your money to enrich your life doesn't seem healthy.
right.
Doesn't seem like the way we should be going.
And so what Weber diagnoses, and this is somewhat contested, like his theory is, I think at this point, over 100 years old.
Yeah.
There's definitely been arguments against it being, usually the arguments are not that this doesn't happen, but that it's not the major chord that he thinks it is, that there's a lot of other factors that give rise to
Mm-hmm.
contemporary capitalism. But basically what he says is like, so at this time and point in what is today the Netherlands and Belgium, right? So in the Low Countries, where we see the joint stock company emerge as a social form, which really requires you to take your money, give it to someone else as an investor with the promise that you'll get more back.
Mm-hmm.
And, and there's risk involved, and the payoff is capital. It's not, and to create that sort of focus on capital, what he notices at the same time is the rise of Calvinism in those areas.
Yeah, he's talking
And
about
what Calvinism does is it creates this ideology and an anxiety, right? It's really driven by anxiety for him, where I want to be loved by God. I want to be one of the chosen.
And then to be successful is to be
well, it's a little trickier than that.
Loved by God.
Because there's a notion of predestination in Calvinism. So I don't know whether I'm one of the chosen or not. But there is this notion that that there will be fruits that kind of signal my chosenness.
Yeah.
Right. And so having a signal of value for myself that God loves me, while living a modest Christian life of not participating in the gratuitous love of wealth,
Yeah.
but at least approaching it with moderation, he sees as driving this move from wealth to capital, that people are like, I need a fat bank account because it shows that I am loved by God. But I also know that I'm loved by God because I lead a modest life that doesn't take advantage of that capital to indulge in sensual goods, right?
And this is where, when we see, people, poor people, homeless people, there can be an idea that these people aren't chosen by God.
Right.
they're heathens, they're sinful, and not like, oh, this is mental health. These is people that didn't have access to economic advantages. These are people that didn't have access to emotional and social advantages. These are people that didn't have geographic advantages.
Yeah. I mean, this does, I think, lay the groundwork, and I think so. I think there's some value to his theory because I also think, yeah, it lays the groundwork within that Protestant work ethic that poverty is a moral issue. That like
Yeah.
if you're impoverished, there's a moral failing that you're to blame.
You're not doing,
Which
yeah.
brings us to the heart of what's at this argument, right? About what Buddhism says about the problem of evil, right?
Yeah.
So she opens up by saying, like, he says karma is the most perfect, the perfect answer to the problem of evil
Mm-hmm.
as a kind of rational system.
Yeah.
And part of what she's then going to say is like,